Cooperative Liquor Trades Federation in Melbourne and a member of the Trades Hall Council for many years, being interviewed by Wendy Lowenstein of the Folklore Society of Victoria in late 1966 in Melbourne.
Yeah, were they?
Oh yes.
What, straight after the war?
Straight after the war.
Make it you're got a softer voice than me. What? How come? How? What was that?
Are you on it now?
It doesn't.
Well, now, after the war, when we were demobilized, after the war, in the end of 1918, there was men came to Scotland from all over the world, men from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Scotsmen that had gone abroad and came back.
Yeah.
Well, now, through the numbers of them, the excess of workers, and the fact that all the munition factories had closed down, all the shipyards that had been engaged in building various, replenishing the fact of the fleet, the merchant fleet, well, all those places used to automatically close down. And that threw larger numbers onto the unemployed market. Well, with the result that thousands, tens of thousands in Scotland out of work, and altogether in the British Isles there was millions.
I think it's about 10 inches.
Yeah.
Millions, were they?
Millions out of work, 2 or 3 million. Well, then there was the big struggles there for a 40-hour week, the battening of the workers in Scotland by the police, many of them ex-servicemen, and a whole number of us thought, well, now, what's the good of it? There's not much security here. I had to complete my apprenticeship, which I did, and then I had to look around here, there, and everywhere for work, and apart from a few odd jobs lasting about 3 months, out of work a couple of months, I made up my mind the best thing for all concerned was to make my exit out of the country, like what happened to tens of thousands of other people in Scotland. And incidentally, when I was back there last year, checking on the population of Scotland, the population of Scotland when I left was 4.5 million. Today it's 4 million. So it would be about the only country in the world, Ireland similarly, I think, where the population is actually less today than it was, say, 50 years ago.
And did it ever come back up in between? Has it grown and gone down again, or has it just never got back to what it was?
It's never got back to what it was, but there's other factors, of course, in that, such as the families are not as large, and a large number of Scottish people have gone to England to work, because there's a bigger arena there of factory employment than what there is in Scotland.
And would England have suffered the same after?
No, the population of England when I left was 44 million. The population of England today is just around 50 million.
But like at that time when jobs were hard to get, were they equally hard to get in England?
Equally as hard in England. As a matter of fact, jobs were always hard to get. When the apprentices, you probably got a fair sort of a training in the apprenticeship in Scotland, but after the apprenticeship was concluded, the employer had a pool of skilled labour. Well, he's not going to employ an apprentice at full rates of pay when he can get a man with more experience. With the result, the younger people just simply had to get out of it.
And it wasn't the same when you got here? Like, how did you come as an assistant migrant, Jim?
No, came out here to Australia, paid our own fare, £38. And when I got here, I went to the Trades Hall, was the first place I made tracks for, and I think I got work within a couple of days, and I never looked back as far as employment was concerned.
Had you been interested in the trade unions in Scotland?
Yes, I was connected with the trade. I was in the Scottish Labour College too, immediately after the war was over, and got a grounding in Marxism and the working class movement there. Of course, the movement in Scotland was composed of various sections. There was the Socialist Labour Party, the Workers' International Industrial Union, the British Socialist Party, the Independent Labour Party, and a whole number of those organisations, all claiming to have socialism as their objective, but all different methods of achieving it. Some were anti-parliament, some were pro-parliament. Some were a combination of industrial and political action. And this was prior to the Communist Party coming on the scene. When the Communist Party in Britain was founded, which was founded just as it was here in Australia through a number of those organisations, finding out that their own particular narrow concept of organisation was not fitting into the modern set of circumstances as was slowly arising, new circumstances arising, the Communist Party was born in Britain.
Oh, when was that?
That'd be about 1921.
No, that's just before you left, was it?
Yes, about 18 months to 2 years before I left.
Oh, and had your family been interested in trade unionism and
No.
politics? Or how did you come to it?
Well, I think it was just through association with the men working in the shipyards where I've concluded my apprenticeship.
Oh,
and that.
you were in the... Like,
Because everybody there in Scotland around that period there was nothing else. Socialism and socialistic propaganda was everywhere. The street corners were every night all over the place. Glasgow, with its strong shop steward movement, was just seething with socialist agitation and socialist propaganda.
and you came from Glasgow, did you?
No, Edinburgh.
Oh, I see. And like, when you started your apprenticeship before the war, and you
Yeah.
dropped off and went to the war, did you?
No, it called up.
What were you in the Navy?
No, well, they put us in the first part of the business. They put us into a fortress engineering organisation looking after searchlights. And then from there, of course, when conscription wasn't able to do the job through the casualties were very high, well, they just simply drafted us into the infantry. I went to Salonika, and then from Salonika came back and then went to France. I was in France at the end of the war.
Was there any was there much anti-conscription
Well,
thinking?
it didn't arise. You see, the question of conscription didn't arise. The way that it was featured in all the capitalist press and by the military and by the politicians was that your backs are to the wall. And conscription wasn't thought about in the same way as it's even thought about today. It was an issue there that, the Germans were going to come and eat you, all sort of business, and people just accepted.
Andy, Jim, yes, there's no doubt about that.
Half the battle.
Yeah. Well, anyway, tell us about the when you came here. You went to the trade hall and got your job, didn't you?
Yes, no, wait a minute.
No, you were talking about the conditions in the trade of electricity.
Yeah, but you're not putting it on yet. Wait a
Yes,
minute.
it's on.
Yeah, but what are you doing? Oh.
It's going. It's going. It doesn't matter. Forget about it. Your conditions in the trade and the electrician.
Well, no, yes, the conditions in the electrical trade were very good. This continued for some time. Well, I had a variety of jobs. I worked in lift work. I went over to Sydney for 12 months. I worked over there with Standard Way Goods, the lift people. And I set myself out to get as much experience as I could working into trade because work was available. Well, I became active in the electrical trades union, and I used to go away to the country with Jim Hudson, who was the organizer there. We used to go around some of the camps where the SE, and I used to talk to them and get a bit of socialist propaganda in.
You were a socialist, like even in those days.
Oh
were
yes,
you?
I was just sort of freelance. You understand what I mean? Because I did go along to a number of the meetings that was here of the Socialist Labour Party and the Workers' International Industrial Union. They used to hold meetings in the Temperance Hall.
That Workers' International Industrial Union, is that a IWW?
No, it was a sort of the industrial wing of the Socialist Labour Party.
And that's different to the ordinary Labour Party?
Oh yes, the Socialist Labour Party. They have a few. It's more or less a Trotskyist organisation today. You know, it adopts a peculiar line. Well, of course. They seem to be more concerned about throwing pamphlets at each other and arguing the point. Didn't get very far. And I was active a bit in that way. In 1928, if you come up to that period, 1928, I joined the Socialist Party of Australia. They seemed to be fit into my thinking at that particular time was the question of socialist propaganda.
That was different from the Socialist Labour Party?
Yeah, different, because their line was that you had to capture political power by the intelligence of the people and who voted a socialist ticket, so to speak. And then when you had in Parliament and you had control of the armed forces of the state, well, all would be well.
That was
Very, very nice in theory, of course, all those sort of things, but I would always an inclination towards the Communist Party. I felt that there was something wrong with this line, and the people that I associated with, well, I found them just two-way merchants. As a matter of fact, many of those in the Socialist Party of Great Britain afterwards left there and joined the Labour Party. So much for their sincerity. Clark of the Seamen's Union, who was one of the leading lights in the Socialist Party here and stood for Parliament once for Melbourne Ports as a socialist straight out, well, he said that I was a sort of a comm stooge, that I was putting up a line more in line with the Communist Party.
Was there a Communist Party?
Oh yes, it was a Communist Party. Oh, it was well established in this sense, Ralph Gibson was, no, just a little ahead of Ralph Stein. There's a number of Shelley and a number of others were there. Some of those, Sharkey was there, of course, and those sort of people. And they periodically came over from Thornton, I knew well, and all these men active here, active in the unemployed struggles. Although I was never unemployed, fortunately enough, I did devote myself to propaganda, and in 1928 we opened up the square at Albert Park.
Oh, you lived in Port, had you?
No, I lived in Albert Park, and we carried on that propaganda, must have been for about 25 years. Every Friday night I spoke there at the square, and there was all different speakers came, the Communist Party, and we made a sort of a united platform of it. There's no narrowness about it, but of course our only narrowness about it was that the Labour Party was as much our enemies, and the trade union leaders were as much our enemies as the employing class at that particular time. When I look back and I read some of the statements I made and so on and so forth, I think, good heavens, did I say that? And you might say to yourself, well, why did you do it? But in those days it was very difficult to do otherwise, because the union officials then were just lining themselves up with the employing class. Any struggle, any resistance or any encroachments on living standards, the officials lined themselves up with the boss. And any militant, and there was probably thousands of militants in Australia that were victimised, and records will prove it. A funny thing that Jim Munro, the present secretary of the Liquor Trade Union, and myself at the present time were the only two that were expelled from the Trades Hall Council. I was expelled thereafter. I said it was run by a junta composed of Monk and Mundy and two of the other men, and there was a stooge there in the audience. He had taken it all down, and up he went, and on the Trades Hall Council, the Nat Roberts of the E.T.U, Nat's passed on, of course, he had all the stuff laid out, and I was expelled. I got back after a bit. I had to apologise, of course, and get back, and when I became secretary of the Liquor Trade Union. But the struggle was very vicious. It was a vicious struggle against the right wing, as we would call them now, and there was very, very few straight-out left-wing people in the Trades Hall then.
When did the sort of struggle start to develop from your mind?
Well, I think that the Depression, of course, drew a cleavage, a line, because of the attitude of the Labour Party here. You remember Tunnicliffe was Premier here of Victoria, and the unemployed were battened in Burke Street. The Trades Hall was closed to the unemployed to a great extent. They had Colonel Lees, a man who was supposed to be a leader of the unemployed, paid for by the Trades Hall. Well, all his work was, of course, more or less sabotaging the activity of the unemployed on the job, living on a mere pittance of sustenance allowance, being forced to go out of the country to work, leave their families and so on. Being evictions were quite common. And of course, out of this, of course, grew the leadership of the unemployed workers' movement here in Victoria, and the majority of those that took an active part in that were members of the Communist Party.
When was this?
I'd say around about 1930, 31, 32, right on to the mid-30s, all the way through.
And the liquor trade, the breweries wasn't affected greatly, was it?
Well, the brewery was, in the struggle in the Liquor Trade Union, after I was there about 12 months, the Morgan Murphy, the secretary of the Liquor Trade Union, then I wasn't a member of the Liquor Trade Union then, knowing my political views and carrying on a bit of propaganda, he branded me as a straight-out communist stooge, and then pressure began to bear on to get rid of me. But I had got on top of them a little bit. I was very friendly with the then secretary of the Queensland Railways Union, Tim Maroney, and clerk of the Seamen's Union was secretary of the Seamen's Union, and when they did try to get me out of it, I was able to bring sufficient support and pressure from them that if I was being victimised for my political views, they'd leave the beer which was taken by the ships sent to Queensland on the Melbourne seaboard, and Maroney said that the Queensland workers would refuse to carry it. So we were able, it might have been a bit of bluff, I don't know, but anyhow it worked. And from then I coasted along, and then some of the workers in the brewery thought the best thing for all concerned was for me to join the Liquor Trade Union and industrial unionism, you see, all in one union, and there was a big tussle to keep me out, but eventually I got in. The constitution was wide enough that they couldn't actually refuse, although I was in another union.
Does the Liquor Trades Union cover the whole now of the brewery?
No, but still...
You can if you want
The
it.
constitution was there that you could join it. Because you could join it as a casual barman from that standpoint, because there was men who worked on the racecourse who were members of other unions. So the precedent was set. And after a big debate there, to keep me out, I eventually got membership. Well, having two sort of swords sort of my armoury, I was able to do a little bit of boxing on, and we carried on this struggle, and we built up a very strong militant section. Even at our fractions, at our broad fraction meetings then, in the 30s, we were able to get as many as 200 there at Temperance Hall to them. And we had a powerful organisation going. Wasn't all communists, of course, but we had communist cadres come along and speak to our fraction meetings, and then we started contesting the ballots for the elections, and we had all sorts of tricks there. We had to burn the ballot papers, heave the ballot box out of the window, and we done everything. They faked the ballot on it.
They faked it on you?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes, they done everything.
How do you explain the change, the lack of militancy change, say, from the 1890s, the 1900s, into the 19th century?
I found it very difficult here in Australia. Not difficult, but it was something that struck me was the strong labour content of the Australian working class, or those that were interested enough in trade unionism. But it was more of a, anti-boss feeling than anti-capitalist system. That is, that they spontaneously, on many occasions, were prepared to fight on some principle against the employing class, for increases, for defence of their living standards, but could not see that this everyday struggle was just an everyday struggle, that they didn't see issues purely on a class issue. And you find that today, that a whole number of Australians are very good, they're anti-boss, they might be anti-Balti or anti-Halt or anti-Menzies, but they're not pro-socialist or pro-communist. They won't go that far. They'll go along the road a long way with you. But they don't see issues as a class issue. They don't see the working class as a class, and that whatever they are taking part in is just part of the class struggle. And there is a difference, of course, between the two struggles. The everyday struggle for wages, democratic rights, and etc., or a new dustbin in the lane of a municipal arena, and all these sort of issues are all very good. But in the final analysis, if you're not prepared to go further, that is, then all you finish up the everyday struggle, all you'll get out of it's a headache.
What do you think this is because of the prosperity of the Australian worker?
Well, I didn't see it as prosperity, because I was able to understand that in reality, the struggles of the Australian working class has been the conditions of the Australian working class have been grossly exaggerated. Now remember this, up to 1942 or so, when the war began to take shape and new jobs came into being, building up the necessary war material, etc., how many workers could have saved any money out of their wages? They just couldn't do it. It was just an impossibility. There may have been some above the average of the workers, but striking those on the average and those below, and the fact that in the boot trade and in the building trade and in many, many sections of industry, there wasn't continual employment at all. It was a bit of a myth. And although climatical conditions and many other sets of circumstances, perhaps more annual leave, there was only a week in the early part, but there was a certain number of paid holidays, that it did appear that there was a little bit of Jack as good as his master sort of idea prevailed among the Australian working class, that this sort of befuddled many of them. And then in the comparisons, they having heard the sorrowful tales of poverty and insecurity of people coming from overseas, made them believe that it was really much better than it really was. But of course, when the Depression came along, it cancelled out all those false ideas about the self-sufficiency of Australia as the great beneficent employing class here. Well, it proved conclusively that the Australian working class were right up against it, and in dire poverty. Probably the period of the Depression here exposed in that period anyhow this fallacy, this El Dorado, this beautiful land of whispering palms and blue lagoons. It just wasn't true.
When, like in the Depression, you lived in Albert Park in Port Melbourne, did you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And tell us about the the Red Square and the
Well, now
campaigns they had down there.
I was active in the Trades Hall Council, of course, and in the
You
union.
were in the Communist Party by this time, were you?
No, I wasn't. No, I was just still I worked very closely with the Communist Party. Percy Laidlaw never joined the Communist Party either, you know.
Right, yes.
And Percy and I had done a lot of propaganda, and we were great friends, Percy and I. And well, I don't know. I had some differences, of course, with the Communist Party. Then there was some communists that didn't appeal to me at all. Some that we were associated with that, not that we were any better in that sort of a way, but there was just some.
You were still in the Australian Socialist Party.
No, I was in the Socialist Party of Australia, and I got out of that when they expelled me out of that, and we formed.
Oh, what did they expel you for?
Oh, for carrying on propaganda, which they said was communist propaganda.
Oh, they were opposed to communism.
Oh, they were definitely opposed to the Communist Party.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that the Communist Party was only out for putting up a string of reforms at parliamentary elections. They said, used to say, like a string of sausages. They had all these reforms. Their line was straight out socialism or nothing.
Oh, they didn't believe in reform.
No, they didn't believe in reforms at all.
And I felt strongly about this, did they?
Oh, my word. Oh, and still do. But, of course, that's the people, even in Britain, of course, they still have that paper in Britain, the Socialist Standard. And, it probably fits in with a whole lot of people's points of view. But they never got anywhere. You see, there was no basis among the working class for their activity. It was very pleasant propaganda they listened to. And they could always get an audience and that sort of thing. But they started to put pressure on me that I was going off half-cocked sort of business, and the best thing for all concerned was to get out of it, which I did. And I felt a lot cleaner and healthier too when I got out of it.
What were some of the leaders in that party? Who were some of the people in it?
Oh, well, there was a clerk of the Seamen's Union. He's now working for some firm as a writing their monthly journal, I think, for the liquor trade in New South Wales. This great toreador of this mountain of class consciousness, he shifted his ground. Stan Willis, who's now an organiser, quite a decent fellow, Stan, who was a boilermaker down in shop steward at Newport for many years. He's got a son up there at the Trades Hall, assistant personnel officer to Bob Hawke. And he joined the Labour Party. Another one that was active in it was Morgan, the former secretary of the Boilermakers Union. He joined the Labour Party. Well, of course, to my way of thinking, politically, they moved away to the right.
Well,
probably.
They said they were left.
They were too left for the Communist Party. We were only a bunch of revisionists. Something akin to the attitude that Hill and those people adopt today. And if you trace these people, see, I've had a long experience with people. I know them all. And I've watched how they shift, how they move in their opportunist methods, either to get a job or to give the business away altogether.
Well, now about the the Red Square, was that was it always like easy? I mean, was it legal there?
Well, now they did bring pressure to bear from the council, with the police and that there, but it was very difficult for them to do it. We had tested all that out, that the square wasn't a footpath, and it didn't impede anybody moving there. It was a little grass plot. They put seats there, and in the end there was a couple of men on the council, Morris the dairyman, and I think Alexander, the assistant town clerk. They were a little bit sympathetic. They used to come to the square themselves, but remember, we had a tremendous number of people who wanted the meetings. The women used to come there of a Friday night and bring the little stools, and I used to perform. They'd get more a bit of bull and a bit of fun and all that, but the propaganda, the meat on the bone was there, and of course there would have been pressure from them. They looked upon those meetings as their night out, and in the summer nights there, we used to go for hours.
Who else spoke but you?
Oh, well, there's different ones used to come down there, but not saying boastfully, I think I'd have been about the main one. Must have been damned awful for people to listen, but they still listened anyhow. And they used to come back for more. Dr. O'Day spoke there at various times, Ralph Gibson, and a number came there when it came at a later period. What's his name from Willie Gallagher from Scotland came there to the square. A lot of international ones came. Anybody of any prominence would come there, and we'd get a lorry that night instead of the platform and the loudspeaker, which they never objected to. And it was very, very good. I meet men today, men that would have been way up in the 60s and 70s, still alive, that remember the historic nights there in the square. Well, and of course that carried on all during the war. And then I stood for Parliament down there in 1943 on the first occasion. And actually speaking, we didn't only hold the meetings in the square during that period, we'd hold meetings in Bay Street, Port Melbourne, down in Armstrong Street, Middle Park, and stuck pamphlets in all their boxes till the people got sick dragging the pamphlets out.
Was there much unemployment in that area at that time?
Not during the war.
No, but it was during the Depression. Tell us about the
Oh,
Depression in
yes.
Port
Oh
Melbourne.
yes, well all around that part there was thousands of unemployed. Thousands. No work at all. And there was the big waterfront struggles, in the 30s. Well, then of course the Alan Whittaker was shot on
Who was
the water. He was a delegate shot on and these people still live down in Port Melbourne. His mother's still alive.
Was he killed?
Yeah, he was shot on the waterfront.
Tell us about it. 'Cause I don't know about that.
The scabs, the Hogan government, the Labour government too, remember, they put scabs on the waterfront. And of course the wharf labourers, the union, they fought back against this, and the police was sent to protect the scabs. Well, Alan Whittaker and those men down on Port Melbourne Pier, they were staging objections to the scabs, quite naturally, picketing, etc. Although Whittaker had never taken an exceptionally prominent part, he was just a good member of the Waterside Workers' Federation doing his job. And then, of course, the police came down and this day down there, and I know dozens that was there on that day, and just fired straight at them. Some were wounded, and Whittaker was shot dead.
And what were they? They were picketing, were they?
Yeah.
And what was the strike about? What was the issue?
Well, the issue was the cut in their wages, and the fact that they put scabs in during the Waterside Workers' dispute.
Mm-hmm. What year?
And of course, 1930, 31. I couldn't just go right to the actual date of that. I would say around about maybe 1929. It was in either of those 3 years. And of course, it was a tremendous struggle here, the waterfront struggle.
Yeah.
And then there was the scab organisation, which is still functioning in a way, but I think they're all amalgamated again now, which is common sense. No good having two organisations there.
How was that? That was the P&C, was it? Permanent and Casual?
That's quite correct.
How did that arise?
Well, of course, they got the federal government came in and gave them that protection by law, and then they set up that other organisation,
I see.
which eventually, of course, went out of existence.
Well, in the Depression there, what were the issues like that you've talked about and was it the Red Square movement? Did they have local special local issues? What were the demands?
There was, actually speaking, to be quite truthful, there was no local issues. The issue was the system of society that we were living under, the fact that another part of the world, the Soviet Union, had been got rid of capitalism or class suppression, and was now a land without capitalists. And we based all our propaganda that it was possible to find another alternative to this. That was the economic circumstances they were living under. Now, my experience, people can only talk from their experiences in Australia as a socialist propagandist. My experience has been the following, that if you go to the Australian working class, I'll go to any meeting you like, and you put up the socialist position, that is that there's an alternative to this, that people will, my experience has been they'll accept it. They'll accept it. They may query you on how's it going to come about, or they may be looking for somebody to get them there, but they will admit that this present system holds nothing for them at all. And it can be exposed and debunked and so on. Well, now, that was proven by the vote in 1943, when we had the best organised methods around the polling booths, I think, that I've ever seen in any election circumstance. I've seen them in New South Wales and been up there participating in them. Was the walkie-talkie we started in. Not just standing around the polling booth handing out indiscriminately how to vote cards, but starting at a point about 200 or 300 yards away and walking with people and talking to them on the way going. If they've got any questions, is there anything they would like to ask to help them through? And then in the finish, of course, if they say to you now, I'm not convinced, I'm voting for this other party. Well, you just say you had a vote card for a start off. They're not going to change their mind just from the time they see you at the gate. Well, that cottoned on, and we had people all over the place. It was when we recruited people, there was Communist Party members and all. It was one of the biggest, it was in 1943. And there were some humorous incidents associated with it. There was the Bob Bredner, who's the present one of the pillars of the ALP. There was no Labour Party candidate stood. There was only myself and Howard, who was a soldier overseas, but has come back to contest the election.
He was a Liberal, was he?
Liberal, yeah. He's now a Liberal for some part, Isaacs or some of those other parts. Is it down there? I don't know if that's the name. Down here.
Sure.
St Kilda, down that way.
Yeah.
He was the Liberal member for Albert Park. And there was McRobertson's High School, a couple of places, one place in Fitzroy and another place in Inkerman Street, and Albert Park polling booth at Middle Park and at Albert Park St Silas Church. So there, we were going around feeding the people with the how to vote cards. And as we got there, Brebner said, look at this. Here was a fellow lying on the ground, and he was a real drunk too. He was drunk and he'd vomited all over the place, and they had hung around his neck, vote for Coull. And as people passed, oh, isn't that disgusting? Disgusting. So anyhow, what we did with this fellow was we got a couple of chaps to drag him away and dragged him round the corner somewhere. And I had one of those placards in Bob's car, vote for Coull, vote for Haworth. We pinched one of them and we had one ready. So the next problem was how could we give them a dose of their own medicine. And one fellow said, I'll do it, Jimmy. So we got a bag and he lay down there and he made out he was drunk and he was using a bit of strong language and vote for Haworth around him and sort of reversed the issue. But the funny part about this was the police come along and pinched this fella and took him up to the lockup in South Melbourne. And we'd forgot all about him. We thought he'd gone. We just didn't know about that being on the rounds. And fella told us, said that fella was picked up. So we had to go up to the South Melbourne police station and get him out. And Sergeant went mad. He said, what to put the lot of you in. So he said to the fella, get out of it. But anyhow, we got out of it all right. A lot of humorous instances. Then there was the women coming around. I remember one old Irish lady said, is this man Coull? She said, is his name O'Cool? I said, it doesn't make any difference, does it? Why? She said, oh, shit, I knew him as a little girl when I was in Ireland. Well, she must have been 80 if she was a day. And as though it was a state election and nothing to do with rationing, they said, will he put more butter on the plate? Of course he will. He's against this rationing of butter. And we done all sorts of tricks, which I suppose there's no theory in the business. The work of the great masters don't tell you what to do in those set of circumstances. But it had some amusing ones. There's another one over in McRobertson's High School. I went up. I used to do a bit of handing out ourselves as we were going around, and this woman said, I said, will you vote for the socialist candidate, madam? She said, that man, she said, he's a communist in disguise. And she said, what's he done in the war effort? Well, I said, I don't know what he's done in this war, but I said he was a very brave man during the last war. She didn't know she was talking to me at all. And a fellow then came into the argument, a chap called Tom Larkin. I'll say he was a brave man. He dragged me to safety under heavy shell fire and I had my leg shot off. She said, I don't believe it. So he said, well, you tap it. You've got your umbrella. Tap my leg. She did tap his leg, and of course he had a cork leg. He lost his leg. He fell off a tram in Richmond somewhere. He'd been coming from a football match. Well, she said, I never knew. She said, he must be a brave man. I'll vote for him. So whilst the voting was high, I suppose we were doing a lot of skullduggery in the process, the same as the other people were doing in their particular baloney.
And what was the vote?
I got between 10 and 11,000 votes. To the Liberal candidates, 13,000.
13?
13. And it's the biggest vote that's ever been even. None of the Labour Party came near that vote there, although they've won the seat for Labour since. But in Albert Park itself and in Middle Park, we had a majority. That was the funny thing. And
what do you lay that down to, Jim?
Well, I lay it down to one thing, truthfully. fair amount of propaganda and activity in the area. The fact that there was plenty of literature, which we used to get typed and radioed, pouring into their letterboxes, plus the fact that the Soviet Union in the war had debunked and cancelled out many of the anti-socialist propaganda that had been prevalent prior to the war breaking out. So there's a number of contributing factors, but I would, without being egotistical about it, I would say that it was the propaganda has a tremendous effect. It's no good saying it, and then of course there wasn't the opportunity for people to get sidetracked. There was no television, and there was no much places for people to go in those days. Those who were unemployed had to confine themselves, and the workers, many of them still remembered, although they were beginning to get work, many of them remember that period that they'd been through. Today, of course, the younger people don't know anything about that and think that you're a calamity monger if you talk to them about it too.
And would you say that Port Melbourne was a particularly distressed area during the...
I would say Port Melbourne was about one of the main, one of the main areas, and South Melbourne.
And was there a unemployed movement?
Oh my word, yes. Oh, there was the unemployed workers movement. It was very strong there. A man, Lacey Lyons, was very active in that there, and a number of us there were in big meetings.
What did they do? What was their...
Oh, well, their main line, of course, was on the sustenance fight, fighting for more sustenance, fighting against evictions, evictions were all over the place there. Mm-hmm. People's furniture being thrown out onto the street.
And what did they used to do about that?
Oh, we used to stand around. We used to stand around night time too. In many occasions of a night time, we used to stand around, and we got the police a little bit on our side. There was a number of occasions where the furniture was thrown out in the street. We went and put it back in. Brought pressure to bear on the land and estate agents. But we declared them black, and there was pressure went on all the time. Activity went on all the time too. There was no other escape for the unemployed man. He had to do something about it. Many, of course, were attracted to the unemployed workers' movement that were not communists, but then the main leaders, those that were mainly active in carrying on the propaganda, were.
This is so. The Labour Party, they didn't lead the unemployed?
The Labour Party took absolutely no part in it at all. There may be perhaps one here or there that would, but in the main, of course, all that they were concerned about, just the same as in the main they're concerned today. I heard of a meeting the other day out in one of the electors' courtneys, I think, out there. And of course, I'm not speaking about them personally. I'm not against the Labour Party. I'm against the right-wing policies of the Labour Party. But the bulk of the politicians, of course, I've lived amongst them. I've been amongst them. That they're opportunists. To them, the Labour movement is a place where they can get, if they're able to get ahead, it's a good, secure job. And whilst men like Bob Solly years ago represented Carlton, when the parliamentary salary of a Labour man was about £8 a week, and then by the time he was nipped a bit there, he wouldn't have very much left. I'm not saying it was always that way, but we're dealing with it in the last 25 years or so. It's been a pretty secure, affluent job. And they mean to keep it that way. And you can get bunions on your feet running around there putting letterboxing for them, and they'll use you up and all that sort of thing. There was a number of other incidents too that were a bit humorous around the election. In 1946 I stood again then. Crean, who was the present member for Melbourne Ports, was the candidate, and there was two liberals and Crean and myself. And even then, although there was a Labour man, I just got on 4,000 votes, which was a big vote in 1946. It wasn't as big as the other, you couldn't have expected to be. And by this time, of course, I was a member of the Communist Party, although still stood as a socialist, because I thought it would be better to do that. And no difference in reality, only it wasn't on the actual programme of the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, it was a little bit more left, I suppose, than that. And actually today I think I've been in the party about 25 years, I think, something like that, 24, 25 years. But I chose the Communist Party because I had been in the others, and I had seen that it was the only policy, no other policy, that you cannot make a beeline, because the capitalist class, I think the Spanish War debunked all that with a whole number I knew that shook them all up. the capitalist class today are international, that they won't allow the working class in one country unless it's strong, unless it's strongly organised and moulded and got its potential military strength with it. Well, they just come and crush it. And that happened, of course, you remember, in the Soviet Union. They tried then, and the people that went into the Archangel and the attacks in Baku and Batum in the south and the Black Sea against the Soviet Union, which the terrific task it must have been then, 1/6 of the Earth's surface, to even have sufficient organisation to repel them, but they were able to do that.
When's this just after the revolution?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you see, the rest of the capitalist world was war sick. Britain, the British working class, were a little bit pro-Soviet even then, when the working class overthrew in those 10 days that shook the world that John Reed wrote about. There was strong pro-Soviet feeling in Britain, and there always has been. That must be remembered, that there's been always been a strong pro-Russian feeling among the British working class. Now, this isn't generally known. I'm not talking about the activities of the Communist Party in Britain, but I'm talking about a pro-Soviet feeling. It's very, very strong among the British working class. And this was developed even more so by virtue of the role that the Soviet Union played during the last war. And I met many Scotch people in Russia in the 5 weeks I was there. There was delegations from Scottish miners and Scottish people from all over the place, and this belief goes on all the time.
Yeah. There must be some interesting experiences you've had on the Yarra Bank. You've done a lot of Yarra Bank.
Oh yes, on the Yarra Bank, with some great